All right, deep divers, welcome back. We're going deep with Francis Schaeffer today.
Oh, always a good time.
This is section 5 from The God Who Is There. So if you are following along with our Schaeffer dialogues, head over to morethancake.org for the other episodes. But for now, buckle up. We're going to deal with some big questions today, like what does it actually mean to accept Christ as Savior?
Right.
How do we even begin to talk about Christianity in a world that, well, honestly, often seems to have moved on?
Yeah, it's a challenge for sure. I mean, Francis Schaeffer was already wrestling with this back in the 20th century. And you know what's interesting is his insights are still surprisingly relevant even now. We're diving into some excerpts from one of his books, and he makes a pretty bold claim in this one. He says traditional methods of sharing Christianity might actually be missing a crucial step.
Whoa, okay, I'm intrigued. What is this missing step?
He calls it pre-evangelism. So picture this. You're approaching a castle, but the drawbridge is up. You can shout about, how great it is inside, but no one can hear you. Pre-evangelism is about lowering that drawbridge, building a bridge of understanding before you even start talking about things like conversion.
So it's not about watering down the message. It's about changing the approach.
Schaeffer noticed something that I think is pretty concerning. A lot of young people who were raised in Christian homes, they were leaving the faith. And it wasn't necessarily out of rebellion, but because they felt like what they were being taught just didn't connect with the world they were living in. He argues that we can't just assume that everyone shares our understanding of truth or spirituality.
So how do we bridge that gap? Where do we even begin?
Schaeffer says that Christian apologetics actually has two really vital purposes. It's not just about defending against attacks on your beliefs, although that's definitely important. It's also about making the faith understandable to each generation. You have to speak the language of the people you're talking to.
So it's proactive. We need to anticipate the questions that people are asking today. So how does Schaeffer actually define truth, especially in a world that's become, pretty skeptical of absolutes?
He's completely adamant that a proper understanding of truth is essential before someone can even begin to grasp the claims of Christianity. And by truth, he's not just talking about factual accuracy, he's talking about a grounding for reality itself, a way to make sense of the universe and our place in it.
Okay, I'm following. Yeah. But how do you even begin to have that conversation when so many people just believe that truth is relative or subjective?
Well, that's the challenge, isn't it? Schaeffer argues that modern thought actually often undermines the very concept of objective truth. So it makes it really difficult to even have a conversation about what's real and what matters. Think about it. If someone doesn't believe in objective truth, the idea of accepting Christ as Savior, it loses all its significance. It just becomes one personal preference among many.
Yeah, that's a crucial point. So pre-evangelism starts with establishing some kind of shared understanding of truth. What about this idea of spirituality? You mentioned that Schaeffer had a unique take on that as well, right?
Absolutely. He says that modern notions of spirituality are often really subjective and fragmented. They're focused on just feelings or self-fulfillment. Think about the rise of things like crystals or these personalized spiritual practices that often lack any real grounding.
So not exactly what you'd find in, traditional Christianity.
Right. Schaeffer defines true spirituality as something that is rooted in truth. And it encompasses the whole person, not just our emotions, but also our intellect, our will, our relationships.
That's a much more holistic view than what you typically hear. Does he give any practical examples of what that would look like?
Yeah. He lays out 3 key questions that he says true spirituality has to address. Who is God? Who am I? And how can I have a relationship with him? These questions, he argues, are the foundation for understanding ourselves and the world around us.
Those are definitely questions that I think people are wrestling with, even if they don't phrase it in exactly those terms. So it's about tapping into those existing questions.
Yeah.
And showing how Christianity actually offers meaningful answers.
Exactly. It's about meeting people where they are and demonstrating that faith speaks to the deepest longings of the human heart.
This has given me a lot to think about. We've covered truth and spirituality as crucial elements of pre-evangelism. But how does this all connect back to God? Is that where this final screen analogy comes in?
Yeah, you're right on track. That's where Schaeffer takes this whole conversation to another level. He borrows this idea of a final screen from the physicist Max Planck. And Planck was talking about this search for the ultimate explanation of the universe. Scientists are constantly pushing the boundaries of their understanding. They're trying to find that final piece of the puzzle.
Okay, so Planck is talking about a scientific final screen. But how does Schaeffer apply this to Christianity?
Schaeffer argues that for Christians, God is that ultimate screen. He's the foundation of all truth, the source of all meaning. He's not just another piece of the puzzle. He's the framework that holds everything together.
So it's not about doctrines or rules. It's about a relationship with the God who underpins everything.
Yeah, I think this is starting to click for me.
That's it, yeah. Schaeffer emphasizes that true Christianity, it's not about getting the theology right or reciting the creeds perfectly. It's about having a vibrant relationship with the God who exists. And that's a much more compelling message for people who are searching for answers, and how it reframes our very purpose as human beings.
What's fascinating is how Schaeffer connects this final screen concept, this ultimate truth, to our very understanding of ourselves as human beings.
Okay, so we've established that God is like the foundation of everything, the final screen. But what does that actually mean for us as humans, walking around the world?
That's where his analysis of the first commandment comes in. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. It's one of those verses, people have heard it so many times, it can almost lose its impact.
Right. But Schaeffer seems to be suggesting that we need to take a fresh look at it. What's so different about his interpretation?
He argues that the first commandment takes on a whole new dimension of meaning when we actually ground it in the reality of God's existence. It's not just a nice sentiment or a rule to follow. It's the very core of our purpose.
So if God is just some abstract concept, then loving him doesn't really mean much. But if he's the ultimate reality, that changes things.
Exactly. It's like the difference between saying you love a character in a book and saying you love your spouse.
Yeah.
One is an idea, the other is a relationship with a real person.
I get that. So Schaeffer's saying that our love for God isn't some add-on. It's like the defining characteristic of what it means to be human.
Yes. And this really challenges a lot of modern assumptions about our place in the universe. We often struggle to answer that question of human purpose. We feel lost, adrift, searching for meaning.
And Schaeffer is saying that Christianity actually offers a clear answer, that our purpose is to love God.
In a way that's both profoundly simple and also deeply challenging. It means that we were created for relationship with him, that this love is what gives our lives direction and meaning. It's the missing piece of the puzzle that so many people are searching for.
I can already hear some people pushing back on this, saying that it sounds limiting, like it reduces us to just loving God and nothing else. What would Schaeffer say to that?
Well, remember how we talked about true spirituality encompassing the whole person, not just our emotions? Well, Schaeffer applies that same principle to loving God. It's not some narrow, sentimental feeling. It's about loving him with every aspect of our being, our minds, our creativity, our passions, even our work and our relationships.
So it's not about shutting down the rest of life, but seeing it all as an expression of this love.
Exactly. And here's where things get really mind-blowing. Schaeffer points out something that's often overlooked. The fact that we as humans are even capable of loving God in the first place. It's pretty amazing.
I never thought about it that way. It is kind of a miracle, isn't it, that we have this capacity for something that's so much bigger than ourselves.
He uses the word electrifying to describe this realization, because it suggests that we're not just random accidents of evolution, we were designed with this incredible capacity for love. And that love is ultimately directed towards the God who created us. It's like a homing beacon that's built into our very being.
That's a pretty radical departure from the way most people view themselves today. So much of modern thought emphasizes our individuality, our autonomy, our self-creation.
And Schaeffer is saying that's only half the story. Yes, we have free will, we have the ability to make choices. But our ultimate purpose is found in relationship with God. It's this realization, he argues, that unlocks the true mystery of who we are and what we're capable of.
This is so much deeper than just following rules or believing a set of doctrines. It's about understanding ourselves and our place in the universe in a whole new light.
And it's not about ignoring the tough questions or pretending that doubts don't exist. In fact, Schaeffer encourages us to wrestle with those doubts, to engage honestly with the challenges that life throws our way.
So it's not about blind faith or shutting down our intellects.
Not at all. His approach is all about intellectual integrity. It's about searching for truth with our whole being. And he believes that Christianity has the resources to stand up to that kind of scrutiny. It's a faith that welcomes questions. It invites us to dig deeper, to explore the mysteries of God and creation with our hearts and minds fully engaged.
Okay, so we've talked about pre-evangelism, the importance of truth.
Yeah.
A holistic view of spirituality, the final screen analogy, and this profound interpretation of the first commandment. Are we starting to see the full picture of Schaeffer's thinking?
We're getting there. But the only takeaway is that this isn't just abstract philosophy. It has real-world implications for how we live, how we engage with others, and how we share our faith.
So if we circle back to this idea of pre-evangelism, it's not just about presenting like a watered-down version of Christianity to make it more palatable. It's about laying a solid foundation, addressing the intellectual and cultural barriers that prevent people from even considering the claims of faith.
You're exactly right. It's about clearing away the debris, so to speak, so that the message of the gospel can actually take root and flourish. It's about creating a space where people can encounter the truth of who God is and what he's done for us in a way that truly resonates with their hearts and minds.
This is making me rethink how we approach faith in the modern world. It's not about winning arguments or forcing our beliefs on others.
It's about inviting people into a conversation, a journey of discovery, and it's about recognizing that we're all on this journey together, seeking truth, meaning a connection that goes beyond the surface.
I love that. It's a much more humble and compassionate approach, which I think is desperately needed in our world today. So how do we actually put all of this into practice? How do we engage in this kind of pre-evangelism in a way that's authentic and effective?
Well, Schaeffer was really adamant about the need for Christians to engage with the world around them, not to retreat into isolation. Remember his analogy of the castle with the drawbridge up?
Yeah, that image really stuck with me.
He believed we need to be actively involved in the marketplace of ideas, willing to have real conversations with people who see things differently than we do.
So what does that look like in everyday life? How do we lower the drawbridge, so to speak, and invite people into a genuine dialogue about faith?
It starts with listening. Really listening, not just waiting for your turn to speak, but truly trying to understand where the other person is coming from, what their hopes and fears are, what questions they're wrestling with.
So it's not about preaching at people or trying to win arguments.
Not at all. It's about having the humility to recognize that we don't have all the answers, and that sometimes the most powerful witness we can offer is simply a listening ear and a compassionate heart.
I think that's something a lot of people are craving these days, whether they're religious or not. Authentic connection, meaningful conversation. It seems like we've lost the art of civil discourse in so many areas of life.
Absolutely. And Schaeffer was writing about this decades ago. He understood that people are much more likely to be open to the message of Christianity if they feel heard and respected, even if you disagree on certain points.
Okay, so listening is key. But what about the actual content of those conversations? Where do we even begin?
Schaeffer emphasized the importance of finding common ground. Instead of leading with all the things that divide us, he suggests starting with the things we share, our common humanity, our shared experiences of joy and sorrow, our longing for meaning and purpose.
So instead of jumping right into debates about theology or biblical interpretation, we start by acknowledging that we're all in this human experience together.
Exactly. Think about the issues people are wrestling with today. The search for identity, the fear of loneliness, the desire for justice, the quest for truth in a world that's just flooded with information. These are universal longings that transcend any particular belief system.
And Christianity has something to say about all of those things.
Absolutely. But we need to meet people where they are, not where we want them to be. We need to speak a language that resonates with their experience, not just throw theological jargon at them.
That's a great point. It's about connecting on a human level first, before diving into the specifics of faith. What else did Schaeffer recommend?
He also stressed the importance of intellectual honesty. That means being willing to acknowledge the challenges and objections that people have to Christianity, not shying away from the tough questions.
Like the problem of suffering, the existence of evil, or the apparent contradictions in the Bible?
Exactly. These are real questions that deserve thoughtful responses. Schaeffer believed that Christianity is a robust faith, that it can stand up to intellectual scrutiny. He wasn't afraid to grapple with the hard stuff.
So it's about engaging with people's doubts and skepticism, not dismissing them or pretending they don't exist.
Absolutely. And it's about demonstrating that faith isn't blind or irrational. It's rooted in reason, evidence, and a deep understanding of the human condition.
I think that's so important in today's world where skepticism of organized religion is at an all-time high. People aren't going to be swayed by simplistic answers or emotional appeals.
Right. They want to know that their questions are being taken seriously, that their doubts are being heard. And that's where Schaeffer's approach is so refreshing. He invites us to think critically, to engage with the complexities of faith, to wrestle with the mystery of God.
This is making me realize that pre-evangelism isn't some passive activity. It requires real effort, intellectual humility, and a willingness to step outside of our comfort zones.
You got it. It's about being proactive, engaging with the culture around us, and finding creative ways to spark conversations about faith. It's about being ambassadors of Christ, not just defenders of the faith.
That's a great distinction. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Schaeffer's ideas, what's the one big takeaway you hope listeners will walk away with?
I think the most important thing is that pre-evangelism, it's not just an optional add-on to our faith. It's an essential part of living out the Christian message in a world that's increasingly skeptical and indifferent to traditional forms of religious expression.
It's about meeting people where they are, building bridges of understanding, and creating space for genuine conversations about the things that matter most.
And ultimately, it's about pointing people to the truth of the gospel, the truth that sets us free and gives our lives meaning.
This has been such an insightful deep dive. I feel like I have a whole new perspective on how to approach conversations about faith, not just with non-believers, but with everyone.
I'm so glad to hear that. And remember, pre-evangelism, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's about being sensitive to the individual, listening to their story, and responding in a way that's both truthful and compassionate.
Great advice. So to our listeners out there, we encourage you to take Schaeffer's ideas to heart. Step outside of your comfort zones, engage with the world around you, and see what happens when you start having real conversations about the things that matter most.
You might be surprised by what you discover, both in yourself and in the people you encounter.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep seeking, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.